The conference room door slammed so hard that the glass walls shook. Every head in the office turned toward the sound, then toward me, standing frozen in the hallway with my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder. "Pack your desk," Brandon Wallace shouted, his face red with anger. "You're done here. Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. My mouth went dry. The morning had started normally. I'd arrived at Apex Solutions at 7:30 a.m., same as always, ready to present the quarterly vendor analysis I'd spent 3 weeks preparing. The presentation that was supposed to secure our biggest supply contract renewal. Instead, I was being fired. In front of 40 colleagues. By the director's son who'd been here exactly 6 months. "Brandon," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" "The presentation went well yesterday." He stepped closer, his expensive suit perfect, his confidence absolute. "What's going on is that you've been lying to clients. Falsifying reports. Dad might have trusted you, but I don't." The hallway buzzed with whispers. Phones appeared, recording. My chest tightened as faces I'd worked with for 3 years stared at me like I was a stranger. "That's not true," I said. "Security," Brandon called out, not even looking at me anymore. "My name is Sam Parker, and until that moment I thought I understood how corporate politics worked. I thought hard work, loyalty, and results mattered. I thought being the top-performing account manager for 2 straight years meant something. I was wrong. Brandon Wallace had joined Apex Solutions 6 months ago with an MBA and his father's last name. Director Wallace had built the company from nothing, but he was nearing retirement. Everyone knew Brandon was being groomed to take over. What I didn't know was that he'd been waiting for a chance to get rid of me. The security guard, Tom, looked uncomfortable as he approached. We chatted about his daughter's soccer games dozens of times. "Sorry, Sam," he muttered. "Orders are orders." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The walk to my desk felt endless. 43 steps I'd never have to count again. Colleagues pretended to work while stealing glances. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed relieved it wasn't them. My desk held 3 years of memories. Photos with the team after closing big deals. Thank you cards from clients. The coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Employee" that my work friend Riley had given me for my birthday. I packed methodically, hands steady despite everything falling apart inside. "This is insane," Riley whispered, appearing beside my desk with a box. "Everyone knows you're the best account manager we have." I kept packing, not trusting my voice. The client contracts I'd secured. The vendor relationships I'd built from scratch. The late nights fixing problems Brandon created during his first month. "He's been planning this," Riley continued, glancing around nervously. "Ever since the Hartwell account chose you over him for the expansion project." That made sense. 3 weeks ago, Hartwell Industries had specifically requested me to handle their new manufacturing contract. It was worth $2 million. Brandon had pitched them first, but they'd asked for me by name. His face that day should have been a warning. "Riley," I said quietly, sealing the box with tape. "Take care of the Sterling account. The renewal paperwork is in my filing cabinet. Patricia from North Star Supplies calls every Thursday at 2 p.m. She's tough but fair." "Sam, you're talking like this is permanent." I looked around the office one last time. Brandon stood in his father's doorway, arms crossed, watching me with satisfaction. The same expression he'd worn when he'd stolen my parking spot, my office supplies, and now my job. "It is permanent," I said. Tom cleared his throat. "Time to go." The elevator ride down felt like falling. Tom pressed the button for the ground floor, and we descended in silence. Through the glass doors, I could see other employees pretending not to watch. "For what it's worth," Tom said as the elevator stopped, "nobody believes what he said about you lying to clients." "Thanks, Tom. Your dad would be proud of how you handled that," he added quietly. My throat tightened. Dad had died 2 years ago, but not before seeing me land this job. He'd been so proud when I got promoted to senior account manager. "My daughter, the corporate success story," he'd joke. The lobby felt different now. The same marble floors, same modern art on the walls, but I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a visitor who'd overstayed their welcome. Outside, the morning sun was too bright. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, not starting the engine, just breathing. My phone buzzed with texts from colleagues. Supportive messages. Shocked reactions. Promises to stay in touch. But none of that changed the fact that I was unemployed. 31 years old, no job, and a reputation that Brandon had just tried to destroy in front of everyone. I started the car and drove home, not knowing that in 2 days everything would change. That afternoon, the shock wore off and the anger set in. Not the hot, explosive kind, but cold and methodical. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember about the last 6 months. Brandon's mistakes with the Henderson account that I'd quietly fixed. His condescending emails to female vendors. The time he'd taken credit for my strategy presentation to the board. The way he'd undermined me in meetings, always with a smile. I'd been so focused on doing good work that I'd missed the pattern. He hadn't just wanted my job. He'd been systematically building a case against me. My laptop chimed with an email. From HR, of course. Standard termination paperwork. Violation of company ethics policy. No specifics. No evidence. Just corporate language designed to protect the company from lawsuits. I called my lawyer, Janet Myers, who'd helped me with Dad's estate. "Sam," she said after I explained everything. "Do you have documentation of your work? Email threads? Client feedback?" But I was locked out of my company accounts immediately. That's normal. But if they're claiming ethics violations without proof, and you can demonstrate a pattern of good performance, we might have something. Don't sign anything yet. After the call, I felt slightly less powerless. But only slightly. Day 2 started with rejection emails from job applications I'd submitted the night before. Word traveled fast in our industry. 3 companies I'd contacted had already heard concerns about my reliability. Brandon was thorough, I'd give him that. I was making coffee when my phone rang. Unknown number with a local area code. "Hello. Is this Sam Parker?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yes. This is Patricia from North Star Supplies. I was trying to reach you at Apex Solutions, but they said you no longer work there. Is that true?" Patricia. The vendor Riley had mentioned. The Thursday 2 p.m. calls. Except today was Tuesday and it was 10 a.m. "Yes," I said carefully. "That's true." There was a pause. "That's unexpected. You've been our primary contact for 3 years. You know our business better than anyone else at Apex." "I appreciate that, Patricia." "Sam, can I ask what happened? Because yesterday I received the strangest email from someone named Brandon Wallace about our contract renewal." My pulse quickened. "What kind of email?" "He wants to renegotiate all our terms. Says Apex can get better pricing elsewhere. But the numbers he quoted don't make sense. They're way below market rate." I gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly did he say?" Patricia's voice grew more concerned as she continued. "He claimed you'd been overcharging us for months. Said there was an internal audit that found irregularities in our pricing structure." My stomach dropped. "Patricia, that's not true. Every price we quoted you went through proper channels. I have documentation." "I know it's not true," she said firmly. "I've worked with you for 3 years. You've saved us money multiple times by finding better solutions. This Brandon person is either lying or completely ignorant about our business relationship." "Probably both," I muttered. "Here's what really concerns me," Patricia continued. "He's not just trying to cut our prices. He's making accusations about your integrity. Said you'd been inflating costs to make yourself look good." The pieces were clicking together. Brandon wasn't just firing me. He was rewriting history. Making me the scapegoat for whatever scheme he had planned. "Patricia, can I ask you something? Are you recording this call?" "No, should I be?" "Maybe." Can you send me a copy of his email? I can't do that officially. But let me think about this. Pause. Sam, Northstar has been considering expanding our vendor network. We might have some consulting opportunities available. Are you interested in hearing more? Very interested. Good. Let me make some calls. Can we meet tomorrow? After Patricia hung up, I sat staring at my phone. The first crack in Brandon's perfect plan had just appeared. He'd gotten greedy, trying to renegotiate contracts he didn't understand with vendors who knew the truth. My laptop was still logged into my personal email account, which had years of correspondence with clients and vendors. Professional relationships I'd built that belonged to me, not Apex Solutions. I started making a list of every vendor contact I had. Patricia was just the beginning. By lunch I'd reached 12 companies. The pattern was identical. All had received emails from Brandon claiming I'd been overcharging them. All were confused because they knew their pricing history with me. But here's what Brandon hadn't considered. Vendors talk to each other. They have industry associations, networking events, shared concerns about corporate clients who try to squeeze them. And I'd been invited to their events. Not as an Apex employee, but as Sam Parker, someone they trusted and respected. My phone rang again. This time it was Jackson Brown from Industrial Components Inc. Sam, I just got off the phone with Patricia from Northstar. She says you're available for consulting work. That's right. Good. 'Cause I think we have a problem with Apex Solutions. And I think you might be the only person who can help us solve it. Jackson explained the situation quickly. Brandon Wallace called me this morning. Said Apex was switching suppliers and our contract wouldn't be renewed. Just like that. After 8 years of business. Did he give a reason? Said costs were too high and quality was inconsistent. Which is ridiculous. We've had 0 quality complaints, and our prices haven't changed in 2 years. I was quiet, processing. Brandon wasn't just trying to destroy my reputation. He was dismantling vendor relationships that had taken years to build. Jackson, can I ask you something? Who else has he contacted? I've talked to 3 other companies today. Everyone got similar calls. Patricia from Northstar, James at Precision Tools, and Beth at Capital Materials. We're all getting dropped. That doesn't make sense. Those are our most reliable vendors. That's what we thought too. Until Patricia mentioned your name. Said you'd been fired for supposedly overcharging us. Jackson paused. Sam, we all know that's garbage. You've bent over backward to get us fair deals. Something bigger was happening. Brandon wasn't just cleaning house. He was systematically removing vendors who knew me, who'd seen my work, who could contradict his version of events. Jackson, are you all planning to work with other clients? Already started. And here's the thing. We're all wondering if you'd be interested in helping us find new corporate partners. The picture was becoming clearer. That evening I drove to Patricia's office across town. Northstar Supplies operated out of a converted warehouse. Efficient and unpretentious. Patricia met me at the entrance, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. Sam, thanks for coming. I've been thinking about our conversation all day. She led me to a small conference room where 3 other people waited. Jackson from Industrial Components, a woman I didn't recognize, and James from Precision Tools, who'd supplied Apex with specialized equipment for 2 years. We've been talking, Patricia said, about what Brandon Wallace is trying to do, and about what it means for our businesses. The woman I didn't recognize stood up. I'm Beth Harper from Capital Materials. We've never met directly, but I know your work through our contracts with Apex. I shook her hand, still confused about why they'd all gathered. Here's the situation, Patricia continued. Brandon is systematically cutting ties with vendors who have long-term relationships with Apex. Companies that know the real numbers, the real history, the real quality standards. Why would he do that? Yes. Jackson leaned forward. Because he's planning to replace us with cheaper alternatives. Probably companies that will give him kickbacks or personal benefits. And, Beth added, he needed you gone because you'd have noticed the quality problems immediately. You'd have flagged the irregularities. Felt a chill. You think he planned my firing from the beginning? We think, Patricia said quietly, that you were fired because you were the biggest threat to whatever he's planning next. Patricia opened a folder on the table. After our call this morning, I did some research. Brandon Wallace has an interesting history. She slid a printed article across the table. The headline read, MBA student investigated for vendor kickback scheme. This is from his university newspaper 2 years ago. Charges were dropped, but the allegations were serious. He was supposedly getting payments from suppliers in exchange for favorable recommendations. My hands trembled as I read. The details were eerily familiar. Sudden changes in vendor relationships. Accusations against whistleblowers. Cover-ups by administrators who didn't want scandal. There's more, Jackson said, pulling out his phone. I called my contact at Blair Industries. They used to work with Brandon at his previous job. And 3 senior employees were fired in his first year there. All of them were account managers who worked directly with vendors. All of them were accused of ethics violations. Just like me. Just like you. And 6 months later, Blair switched to a completely new vendor network. All companies with connections to Brandon's college roommates and fraternity brothers. Beth nodded grimly. We think he's running the same playbook at Apex. Get rid of anyone who might ask questions, then bring in his own network of suppliers who'll play his game. The room was quiet as the implications sank in. I wasn't just collateral damage. I was a specific target because I was good at my job. So what do we do about it? Asked. Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. We fight back. Here's what we're proposing, Patricia said, leaning forward. We form our own vendor consortium. Independent suppliers working directly with corporate clients, bypassing companies like Apex altogether. You'd cut them out entirely. Not initially, Jackson clarified. But we'd offer corporate clients an alternative. Direct relationships with trusted suppliers, managed by someone who understands both sides of the business. Beth pulled out a business plan, handwritten but detailed. We've been talking about this for months, actually. The middleman companies like Apex take huge cuts while adding minimal value. If we could work directly with end clients, you'd need someone to manage the relationships, I said slowly. Someone with 3 years of experience in vendor management, James added. Someone who knows quality standards, pricing structures, and client needs. Someone the vendors trust, Patricia concluded, and who clients respect. I stared at them. You're offering me a job. We're offering you a partnership, Patricia corrected. Equal stake in something new. Something that can't be taken away by some director's son with an agenda. My mind raced. It was risky. Starting a business with no guaranteed income. But it was also an opportunity to build something Brandon couldn't touch. What about Apex? Yes. They'll try to stop you from working with their clients. Jackson grinned. Let them try. Most of our contracts are non-exclusive. And besides, after what Brandon's been doing, a lot of corporate clients are going to be looking for alternatives soon. The next morning I called Janet, my lawyer. I explained the vendor consortium idea and asked about legal implications. It's actually brilliant, she said after I finished. As long as you're not using proprietary information from Apex, and you're not actively soliciting their clients, you're in the clear. What about non-compete clauses? Standard non-competes usually apply to working for competitors, not starting your own business in a related field. Plus, given the circumstances of your termination, we might be able to challenge any overly restrictive clauses. I felt a surge of hope. So you think this could work? I think it could work very well. Especially if Brandon keeps making the mistakes you've described. After the call, I drove back to Northstar's office. Patricia was waiting with contracts and a business plan that had grown overnight from 4 pages to 12. "We made some calls," she said. "2 corporate clients have already expressed interest in working directly with us. Companies that were having issues with Apex's new pricing structure." "Which companies?" "Hartwell Industries and Sterling Manufacturing." My breath caught. Hartwell specifically asked for me on their expansion project. "Exactly. They're not happy about losing you." When I called and mentioned our consortium, they wanted to hear more immediately. Jackson arrived with coffee and more good news. 3 more vendors want to join us. Word is spreading fast about what Brandon's doing to Apex's supplier network. The momentum was building faster than I'd expected. And somewhere across town, Brandon had no idea his plan was backfiring. We spent the day creating alternative supply solutions, our temporary name until we could think of something better. Patricia handled logistics and vendor coordination. Jackson managed quality control and delivery schedules. Beth took pricing and contract negotiations. James covered specialized equipment and technical specifications. And I became the client relationship manager, the role I'd essentially been doing at Apex but now with full authority to make decisions. Our first meeting with Hartwell Industries was scheduled for Friday morning. 2 days to put together a presentation that could make or break our entire venture. "No pressure," I muttered, staring at the empty PowerPoint slide on my laptop. Patricia laughed. "Sam, you've been preparing for this presentation for 3 years. You know Hartwell's needs better than anyone." She was right. I'd handled their account since day 1 at Apex. I knew their production schedules, quality requirements, budget constraints, and expansion plans. I knew them better than Brandon ever would. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley. "Emergency at Apex. Brandon messed up Henderson contract. Mr. Wallace is furious. Thought you should know." I showed the message to Patricia. Henderson was one of our biggest accounts. What kind of mistake could he have made? Thought about it. Henderson requires specialized components with very specific quality standards. If Brandon switched vendors without understanding the technical requirements, their entire production line could shut down. Exactly. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Sam, do you think Brandon is incompetent, or is this part of something larger?" I considered the question seriously. The vendor kickback article. The pattern from his previous job. The systematic dismantling of Apex's supplier network. I think he's setting up his own deals, and he doesn't care if Apex suffers in the process. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but I felt energized in a way I hadn't in months. The Hartwell Industries building was familiar. I'd visited dozens of times as an Apex representative. Now I was walking in as something entirely new. Patricia, Jackson, and I rode the elevator to the executive floor. My stomach had butterflies, but they were good butterflies. Nervous excitement instead of dread. The conference room was the same one where I'd pitched their expansion project 3 weeks ago. But the faces around the table looked friendlier than I remembered. "Sam," said Karen Walsh, Hartwell's procurement director. "We were shocked to hear about what happened at Apex." "Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Before we begin," added Tom Rodriguez, their operations manager, "we want you to know that several companies have reached out to us about you recently." My chest tightened. What kind of companies? Vendors mostly. All saying the same thing, that you were honest, fair, and knew the business better than anyone else they'd worked with. Patricia smiled beside me. "That's exactly why we wanted to partner with Sam." I opened my presentation, but Karen held up a hand. "Actually, before you start, we have a confession. We've already decided we want to work with your consortium." Blinked. "You have. Sam, you've been managing our account for 3 years. You've saved us money, prevented quality problems, and consistently delivered ahead of schedule. Why would we want to work with anyone else?" Tom nodded. "The question isn't whether we want to hire you. The question is how quickly you can take over our supply chain management." 2 hours later, we walked out of Hartwell Industries with a signed contract worth $1.8 million annually. Our consortium officially had its first major client. I can't believe that just happened, I said as we reached the parking lot. Believe it, Patricia laughed. You earned this. Jackson was already on his phone with other vendors, spreading the news. Our little startup suddenly had credibility and cash flow. But as we celebrated, my phone rang. Riley's name on the screen. Sam, we have a problem. A big one. What's wrong? Brandon just called an all-hands meeting. He's telling everyone that you're trying to steal Apex clients. He says you violated your non-compete agreement and the company is considering legal action. My stomach dropped. Riley, I haven't solicited any Apex clients. Hartwell called us. I know that. But Brandon's spinning it differently. He's saying you're part of some vendor conspiracy to undermine Apex's business relationships. Patricia was watching my face, clearly hearing both sides of the conversation. Riley, is Mr. Wallace in this meeting? No, that's the weird part. Brandon said his father is out of town on business. But I've never known Mr. Wallace to miss a crisis like this. Something felt wrong. In 3 years at Apex, Director Wallace had never missed a major meeting. He was obsessive about staying informed, especially when it came to client relationships. Riley, do me a favor. Can you find out where Mr. Wallace actually is? I'll try. But Sam, be careful. Brandon seems really angry about this Hartwell thing. After I hung up, Patricia looked concerned. Legal problems. Maybe. Or maybe Brandon is panicking because his plan isn't working. That afternoon, I called Janet to discuss Brandon's threats. Did you sign a non-compete at Apex? She asked. Standard corporate agreement. 1 year, 50-mile radius, same industry. But you're not working for a competitor. You're working for vendors who supply multiple companies, including Apex competitors. And you're not actively soliciting Apex clients. Hartwell approached us. Even better. Sam, non-compete agreements are hard to enforce when the employee was wrongfully terminated. And claiming vendor fraud without evidence could actually be defamatory. I felt some relief, but something still bothered me. Janet, is there a way to find out if Director Wallace really is out of town? Why? I explained Riley's observation about the missed meeting. That is odd. Corporate directors don't usually disappear during client crises. I pause. Sam, are you thinking what I'm thinking? That maybe Mr. Wallace doesn't know what his son is doing. Or that Brandon is making moves while his father is unavailable to stop him. After the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop. On the screen was our vendor consortium's growing client list. Hartwell Industries. 3 smaller companies who'd called after hearing about our Hartwell contract. Potential deals worth over $3 million combined. Success felt strange after months of being undermined. But under the excitement was a growing worry about what Brandon might do next. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop interfering with Apex business or you'll regret it. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Janet immediately. The next morning brought more threatening messages. Different numbers but the same basic content. Stop working with our vendors. Stop stealing clients. Stop spreading lies about Apex Solutions. But it also brought something else. A call from Director Wallace himself. Sam, this is Gerald Wallace. Can you meet me today? It's important. My hand shook as I held the phone. Mr. Wallace, Yes, sir. When and where? My office. But not at Apex. I'm working from home today. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? He gave me his address, a house I'd never been to despite 3 years of working closely with him. Should I bring anything specific? Just yourself. And Sam. Come alone. Don't mention this meeting to anyone. After he hung up, I stared at my phone for 10 minutes. Director Wallace had always been fair with me, but he was also Brandon's father. Was this a trap? A setup for more accusations? I called Patricia. Something's happening. Mr. Wallace wants to meet privately. That could be good or very bad. I know. If you don't hear from me by 4 p.m., call Janet. Sam, maybe you shouldn't go alone. But I was already getting dressed. After 3 years of wondering what Director Wallace really thought about my work, I was finally going to find out. The drive to his house took 20 minutes through a residential area I'd never explored. His home was modest for a company director, a 2-story colonial with a well-maintained lawn. He answered the door himself, wearing casual clothes instead of his usual suits. He looked tired, older than I remembered. Sam, thank you for coming. Please sit down. Director Wallace's living room was comfortable and lived in. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, including several of Brandon from childhood through college graduation. But his expression was serious as he sat across from me. Sam, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Did you steal vendor information when you left Apex? No, sir. I used only my personal contacts and public information. He nodded slowly. I thought so. Because the Brandon who came home last night, ranting about vendor conspiracies and stolen clients, doesn't sound like the son I raised. I stayed quiet, unsure where this was going. I've been out of town for a week, visiting my brother in Chicago. Medical emergency. When I got back this morning, I found 37 voicemails from vendors, clients, and employees, all asking the same question. What the hell is Brandon doing? He stood up and walked to the window. Sam, I built Apex Solutions over 20 years. I'm proud of our vendor relationships, our client service, our reputation. In 1 week, my son has damaged all 3. Mr. Wallace, I didn't ask for any of this. I know you didn't. Which is why I need to understand exactly what happened while I was gone. I told him everything. The public firing. The accusations of fraud. The threatening calls to vendors. The attempts to renegotiate contracts he didn't understand. The pattern of behavior that matched his previous job. Director Wallace listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Sam, there's something you need to know. Brandon wasn't supposed to have full authority while I was gone. He was supposed to consult with our senior staff on major decisions. But he fired me without consulting anyone. He told me it was a minor personnel issue. One problem employee who'd been warned multiple times. The pieces were falling into place. So you didn't know about the vendor calls or the contract changes? Not until today. His voice was grim. Sam, I think my son has been planning this for months. Director Wallace walked to his desk and pulled out a folder. After your call, I drove to the office and reviewed Brandon's computer activity. Email logs, file access, phone records. He handed me printed emails. These are messages between Brandon and someone named Trevor Mills. They go back 4 months. I read the first email. Trevor Mills was apparently Brandon's college friend, who now ran a supply company in Texas. The emails discussed opportunities, and clearing out old relationships, and maximizing revenue potential. Trevor's company isn't registered with any of the standard industry associations, Director Wallace continued. Their quality certifications are barely adequate, but their prices are extremely competitive. Because they're cutting corners on materials and safety standards. Exactly. And based on these emails, Brandon was planning to switch our entire vendor network to Trevor's company and affiliated suppliers. I flipped through more emails. References to eliminating obstacles and neutralizing the Parker problem. My name in black and white, evidence of premeditation. Mr. Wallace, there's something else you should know. I think Brandon has been taking kickbacks from these new suppliers. I explained the university newspaper article and the pattern from his previous job. Director Wallace closed his eyes. I was afraid of that. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out bank statements. I had our accountant run a quiet audit this morning. Brandon's personal account has received several large deposits over the past 2 months. All from companies that don't appear in our official vendor database. The evidence was overwhelming. But I still had questions. Sir, what are you going to do about all this? That depends on you. What do you mean? Yes. Director Wallace returned to his chair, looking every bit his 62 years. Sam, Brandon has damaged relationships that took me decades to build. He's exposed the company to potential lawsuits, quality problems, and loss of major clients. I understand that, sir. But he's also my son. If I fire him and press charges, it destroys his career and probably sends him to prison. If I don't, he'll eventually destroy Apex Solutions. The weight of his dilemma settled over the room. A father choosing between his son and his life's work. There's a third option, he continued. You come back to Apex. As my partner, not just an employee. We rebuild the vendor relationships together. We restore client confidence. And Brandon gets transferred to a role where he can't do any more damage. I stared at him. You're offering me a partnership. I'm offering you half the company, Sam. Because frankly, after this week, I don't trust my own judgment about people anymore. But I trust yours. It was tempting. Return to Apex with real authority. Fix the problems Brandon had created. Secure my future without the risks of running a startup. But something held me back. Mr. Wallace, can I ask you something? What happens when you retire? What happens if Brandon decides he wants control again? I've been thinking about that. The partnership agreement would include specific protections. Brandon would never have authority over vendor relationships or personnel decisions. And if he doesn't agree to those terms, Director Wallace was quiet for a moment. Then he'll be looking for a new job too. I believed he meant it. But I also knew that family relationships were complicated. Today he was angry at Brandon. Next month he might forgive him. Sir, I appreciate the offer. Really do. But I think I need to stay with the consortium. Director Wallace nodded slowly. I understand. You've built something new, something that belongs to you. It's not just that, I said. It's about trust. I spent 3 years building relationships at Apex, and Brandon destroyed my reputation in one day. I need to prove that wasn't deserved. You don't have anything to prove to me, Sam. But I have something to prove to myself. He stood up and walked to the window again. Fair enough. But I have a different proposal. What kind of proposal? Your consortium is handling vendor relationships for companies like Hartwell. What if Apex became one of your clients? Blink. You want to hire us to manage your vendor network. I want to hire you to rebuild our vendor network. The right way, with the right partners, based on quality and reliability instead of kickbacks and personal relationships. It was brilliant. Apex could maintain client relationships while outsourcing vendor management to people who actually understood the business. What about Brandon? Brandon will have to accept the new structure or find somewhere else to work. His choice. Thought about it. Working with Apex as a client instead of an employee changed everything. We'd have defined responsibilities, clear contracts, and the ability to walk away if things went bad. Mr. Wallace, I'd like to discuss this with my partners. Of course. Take all the time you need. As I stood to leave, he handed me another folder. These are all the threatening messages and emails Brandon sent about you over the past week. Evidence in case you need it. Thank you, sir. Sam, one more thing. I'm sorry about how you were treated. You deserved better. That evening I met with Patricia, Jackson, Beth, and James at Northstar's office. I explained Director Wallace's offer to make Apex one of our clients. It's risky, Patricia said immediately. Working with a company that just fired you. But it's also an opportunity, Jackson countered. Apex is a major player. Having them as a client gives us credibility with other corporate customers. Beth was looking at the financial projections. The numbers work. If we manage Apex's vendor network plus our other clients, we'd have enough revenue to expand significantly. What about Brandon? James asked. He's not going to just disappear. Director Wallace says Brandon will have to accept the new structure or leave. His choice. And you believe that? I thought about the bank statements, the emails, the evidence of kickbacks and fraud. I think Director Wallace knows his son crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. We voted. 4 in favor, 1 abstaining. Patricia wanted more details about the contract structure before committing fully. Okay, I said. I'll call Mr. Wallace tomorrow and set up a meeting. But first I had something else to do. I drove home and opened my laptop. Time to write an email to everyone who'd been affected by the chaos of the past week. Vendors who'd been dropped unfairly. Clients who'd been confused by mixed messages. Colleagues who'd watched the whole mess unfold. The subject line was simple. The truth about what happened at Apex Solutions. I wrote carefully, sticking to facts. No personal attacks on Brandon, no emotional language. Just a clear timeline of events with supporting documentation. Then I sent it to 47 people in my professional network. By morning, it had been forwarded to over 200 people across the industry. The next week moved quickly. Director Wallace and I signed an agreement making Alternative Supply Solutions the official vendor management company for Apex Solutions. A 2-year contract with options for renewal. Brandon's response was predictable. First, he tried to claim the vendor management role for himself. When that failed, he threatened to quit. When his father didn't try to stop him, he actually did quit. According to Riley, who kept me updated on office gossip, Brandon stormed out Thursday afternoon, claiming he'd been betrayed by family and would start his own company. Good luck with that, I thought. Trevor Mills and his substandard supply company probably wouldn't be enough to build a real business on. Our consortium, meanwhile, was thriving. 6 corporate clients now, including Apex. 12 trusted vendors providing everything from raw materials to specialized equipment. Revenue projections that exceeded our most optimistic estimates. And me. I had my own office, my own business cards, and my own decisions to make. No more waiting for approval from people who didn't understand the work. No more watching incompetent managers take credit for my successes. Patricia knocked on my door Friday afternoon. Sam, there's someone here to see you. A young woman stood in our lobby, nervous but determined. She looked familiar. Ms. Parker. I'm Nicole Foster. I used to work at Apex in accounting. Used to. I quit yesterday. After what happened with Brandon, I couldn't stay there anymore. He paused. I was wondering if your company might be hiring. I looked at Patricia, who nodded slightly. We had been discussing the need for a financial coordinator. Nicole, why don't you tell me about your experience with vendor payments and contract management? As she talked, I realized something important. Brandon hadn't just failed to destroy me. He'd actually helped me build something better. 6 months later, Alternative Supply Solutions had grown to 15 employees and 23 corporate clients. We'd moved to a larger office space and hired specialists in logistics, quality control, and client relations. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Patricia knocked on my door. Sam, there's something I think you should see. She handed me a newspaper clipping. Small article in the business section. Local supply company declares bankruptcy. Trevor Mills's company had collapsed after several clients discovered quality problems with their materials. Apparently, cutting corners on safety standards had consequences. Any word on Brandon? Yes. Riley says he's working at a car dealership now. Sales, not management. I felt a mix of emotions. Not satisfaction exactly, but closure. Brandon had made his choices and faced the consequences. Just like I had. My phone buzzed with a text from Director Wallace. Sam, wanted you to know that Apex just signed 3 new major clients. All of them specifically mentioned our vendor management as a selling point. Thank you for making us better. I smiled and got back to work. There were new client presentations to prepare, vendor relationships to nurture, and a business to build. At 5:30 p.m. I packed up my desk and headed home. No late nights unless I chose them. No impossible deadlines set by people who didn't understand the work. No more watching incompetent people take credit for my achievements. Outside, the evening air was crisp and clear. I sat in my car for a moment, thinking about everything that had changed since that morning when Brandon had fired me in front of everyone. He'd thought he was ending my career. Instead, he'd set me free to build something better than I'd ever imagined possible. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could have happened. I started the car and drove home, already planning for tomorrow.